Today, we are doing a range test comparison between two interesting cars, the rear-wheel drive version of the Q6 E-Tron called the Performance and the rear-wheel drive version of the Polestar 4 called Single Motor. Both have big battery packs, with the Audi edging out the Polestar just a little with a usable capacity of 94.9 kilowatt hours versus 94.0 kilowatt hours. Both are also running on 21-inch wheels, so this comparison should be as apples to apples as possible. So without further ado, let's jump into this test. I'm back in the Audi Q6 E-Tron, and this week I've driven a lot of different cars. Volvo EX90, Polestar 3, Polestar 4, Zeekr 7X, and now the Q6 E-Tron. And you know, a lot of these cars may not be direct competitors, but they occupy a lot of the same space when it comes to pricing, some of them at the lower end, others at the higher end. And I think it's an interesting comparison with this and that Polestar 4, which is behind me, because it is on the same platform as that Zeekr 7X, and I may be allowed to talk about that car or not depending on what time this video goes up, because there's an embargo the 14th of April and I'm not sure about the the publishing dates. But I'm just going to touch briefly upon it if I'm allowed, and if we're past the 14th of April. If not, I'm just going to cut to the next portion. I think, in a lot of ways, these cars are very similar, and other ways they are not. For example, this drives beautifully, like the confidence, the sense of solidity, the precision, but also that Zeekr X, quiet, comfortable, great price, because you're gonna get a fully spec'd one, a lot cheaper than one of these. And then we come to the car behind us, the Polestar 4, which is built on the same platform as that Zeekr 7X. And at least in my Zeekr 7X video, the day I drove the car, which were pre-production, not prototypes, but not with the final software, there were a lot of issues. Like with the Polestar 4, I drove for the first time almost a year ago here in Spain, and also at the end of the summer, the first press car. A lot of software issues, so hopefully, the issues with the Zeekr X are going to be done and fixed before those cars come to market. But that brings me back to this, because this car just works flawlessly, especially the ADAS is so confidence inspiring. Everything just works, and that's what I love about German cars. This has had no issues in any of the cars I've driven, and I drove this almost a year ago in the north of Spain at the launch. So there's no excuse for me driving early versions of the Polestar 4, and also the Polestar 3 and the Polestar and the Zeekr 7X. Like, I've driven early versions of all of these cars. So yeah, so guys, we're down here in Spain testing a lot of cars this week, and we've been lucky with the weather and unlucky. Today it's 15 degrees Celsius now, dry, damp-ish roads, so the conditions aren't too bad. But the route we're driving today isn't going to be comparable with the cars we've driven earlier this week, because to be able to do all of these tests, we couldn't travel back to the place where we've been doing the other range tests, because that would have cost us another 2 hours. But we're going to where we started, which is about half an hour down the road. And also, like, there is a lot of tire noise in this car compared to the other cars I've been testing this week, especially over coarse asphalt. It is very, very apparent. And now it started to rain a little bit, but hopefully the weather's gonna stay nice, or I don't know. It does look promising. So after about half an hour on the road, our average consumption is 24.3 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. So let's call up Louise in the Polestar 4 and ask what her consumption is. Hello, Louise.
Hello.
Hello. How's the Polestar 4?
I love the car.
You love it?
I love it.
So out of all the cars we've been driving this week, the EX90, Polestar 3, Zeekr 7X, do you like it the most?
I like the Polestar 4 the most.
Wow, but you haven't driven this yet though, you haven't driven the Q6.
No.
Okay, so we're gonna drive this a little bit later, and then we're gonna see what you think about it. But can you want to tell us your consumption after a half an hour on the road?
Yes, it's on 21.4.
21.4?
Yes.
Mine is at 23.9 now. Wow, yours is lower. I did not expect that. This is supposed to be super efficient. 21.4. That is a lot lower than this car and a lot lower than I was expecting. Wow, that is actually very surprising. But okay, now we're gonna continue till our turnaround point and then switch up cars, and I'll talk to you then, okay? Bye-bye.
Yes, bye.
Bye. Now, that is not what I expected at all. I was about to start talking about how quiet and comfortable and good driving this car is. It drives well, it is also very comfortable, but as I started rolling the clip, we hit a bad patch of asphalt and there's a lot of tire noise. So I'm just gonna say it, I've talked about this a lot of times, and in about a month I have one of these on loan back in Norway, and now, nice asphalt, you can hear that. So, you know, this car is very sensitive to good and bad asphalt quality. This isn't the first car we have experienced that with, but you know, normally these cars which are maybe poorly isolated in the wheel wells and also with big wheel and tire combo, you get this resonance, and then over bad asphalt, yeah, it's just not the quietest. So those cars are usually, you know, sensitive, but I really like driving this car. I really like this car. I love the way the exterior looks. I like the interior, except for cheap bits and pieces. So, you know, if this car had, you know, just that 10-15% extra quality in the interior, you know, remove these cheap touch plastics and, you know, just, you know, give us an option for, you know, maybe some nicer stitched materials like leathers and stuff like that we've seen in other Audis. In the past, Audis I've owned, I think the interior would not be anything to complain about. And also, if you just, you know, gave this a little bit more quiet cabin when it came to tire noise, this would probably almost be perfect. So it's a pity because I really like this car. It drives so well and everything just works. And it has switches and buttons and knobs. It is so close to being perfect. It is annoying, the flaws it has. So we're gonna stop right down here. We're gonna switch up cars and then we're gonna head back towards where we started. Not to a charger today because, yeah, not a lot of chargers in general in Spain and not a lot of fast chargers. But, you know, I've done range tests with these two cars extensively in the past. This test is more about putting these two head to head and see which is the most efficient, which gets the most range, and by how much. Because battery pack sizes are pretty much the same size with these cars. So it's going to be very, very interesting to find out. I have to say, I really like the Polestar 4, and it is interesting driving this back to back with the Q6 E-Tron because tire noise is a lot more suppressed in this car. It's not as sensitive to, you know, bad surfaces as the Q6 E-Tron, but there's a lot more noise off these wing mirrors than with that car. Yes, it is very windy today, like we're driving towards a headwind of about 5 to 6 meters per second. So that's why, you know, the results today aren't going to be comparable with the testing we've done earlier this week because the elevation changes on this road are much higher and also much higher than at home, and also because of that wind. So, you know, take it with a grain of salt, but we're at least going to be able to compare these two cars together head to head on the same day on the same route at the same time. But these seats also very good, and I really like the driving position. They call this, you know, a coupe SUV. I'm going to push back on that, you know, marketing term because it's just a little bit of a race sedan. And when you see these two cars next to each other, you can see that, you know, that Q6 e-tron is a real SUV, and this is more like, you know, a raised sedan. It's not an SUV, I wouldn't call it that, but it is a really nice driving car, and I really enjoy the Polestar 3. So we're approaching very soon our endpoint, and I think the results are actually going to surprise you because I am actually surprised. We're now back where we started this range test about 2 hours ago. So there are no chargers here, and usually in these range tests we drive back to the chargers and then we connect and see what kind of charging speed we get after, you know, passive heating of the battery, just, you know, no preconditioning at all, just letting the battery become warm from the driving and the ambient temperature. But because I've, you know, tested both of these two cars, not the rear-wheel drive version of the Q6 e-tron, but the same battery pack, and done many tests, we know what these are capable of. So go check those videos out if you're interested in that. But, you know, this video is all about putting these two head-to-head and see what kind of range they can get and consumption while driving them back-to-back. And I'm pretty surprised. So the Q6 e-tron over this trip had an average consumption of 24 19.5 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers, and this had 22.3. And to be honest, yes, you know, that is more of a proper SUV than this, but we have ran the Q6 e-tron directly against the Polestar 3 and also the Porsche Macan, and that showed to be more efficient than those cars. And I haven't tested this directly against the Polestar 3, but when you look at the rear-wheel drive version of this and that, this Polestar 4 is actually quite a bit more efficient. So when we do the calculations, so how we do it, we take the usable battery capacity of each car, 94.9 kilowatt hours usable in that, and 94.0 in this, and we divide it by the consumption, and then we subtract 3% for heat and discharging losses. That gives the Audi a theoretical range under today's conditions, you know, between what was 14 and 18 degrees Celsius, for the most part dry, but we also had, you know, damp patches and showers, and you know, also that really strong wind is really blowing outside here. That's why I'm filming inside of the car and not outside. But under today's conditions, the Audi gets 376 kilometers of real world range, which isn't bad. But this, the Polestar 4 long range single motor, 21-inch wheels like that car, 409 kilometers of real world range during these conditions. And I think that is actually pretty good. If we had more ideal conditions, you know, a flat route, which we usually have, you know, with small elevation changes and also not a lot of winds and also better weather, you know, sunny skies and dry roads and around 20 degrees Celsius, I'm betting this would hit 450 kilometers easily. So guys, let me know what you think down below. Are you surprised? I honestly went into this thinking the Audi would beat out this, that being, you know, the rear-wheel drive version. But I'm really surprised that this actually beat out that by quite a bit with a smaller battery pack. So guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please drop me a thumbs up down below. And for more car content, as always, please subscribe. See you guys later and goodbye.